Hi everyone, welcome to my Metroidvania YouTube series where we discuss all things Metroidvania, including game reviews, thematic analysis, and more. For today we'll be doing one thing and one thing only, which is reading my X-Fusion review. But before we get started, a little bit of information about myself. My name's Persephone Waard. I have my MA in Gothic English Literature, an independent PhD in Gothic Poetics and Little Gothic BDSM, focusing partially on Metroidvania, and I am the author of the multi-volume, non-profit book series Sex Positivity. Its art director, sole invigilator, illustrator, and primary editor, the other co-writer, co-editor being May Ryan. I'm a male-to-female trans woman, Tolkien and Amazon enthusiast, anti-fascist, atheist, and Satanist, polypan kinkster, erotic artist, pornographer, and anarcho-communist. You can financially support my blog through Ko-fi or Patreon. One is safe for work and the other not safe for work, but the money for either goes towards the same art and essays I produce, which often complement each other. The review that I'll be reading essentially functions like a script, insofar as I've proofread it repeatedly and practiced it multiple times, but there doubtless will be various small mistakes throughout as I read it. Approximately, I would hazard to guess that this reading of said review will clock in at about an hour, but that's just an estimate off the top of my head. All of that being said, let's get started. Also, as we read this review from top to bottom, we will be pausing occasionally to examine visual aids, click on hyperlinks, and read the footnotes. X-Fusion Review, A Beautiful Lie. August 4th, 2025. This review, which I will be keeping relatively short, under 30 pages, is for X-Fusion, a total conversion ROM hack for Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion by Metaquarium. Footnote number 1 reads, a ROM file being the game's original code, the practice popularized by Nintendo after the 1983 Atari crash, i.e. ROM or read-only memory in which data is stored being silicon-based computer chips, including those inside the old blow-on-it plastic cartridges used by Nintendo's console titles, approximately 677 unique releases in total, not including unlicensed games. Versus modifying hardware, a ROM hack changes the ROM's code by hacking the software involved. Likewise, whereas older ROM hacks from the early aughts and 2010s were less drastic and more additive, changing bits and pieces of a game's appearance, while largely preserving its core gameplay experience, a total conversion takes the underlying code and alters it and the visuals to a more sophisticated degree, i.e. to modify the core gameplay experience to a fundamental point, making it less and less recognizable when compared to the original. To that, X-Fusion looks and plays radically different than Super Metroid or Metroid Fusion, while still obviously borrowing from both titles, similarity amid difference, the author's intent here seemingly being to generate uncharacteristic feelings of disempowerment, which it ties to combat, gothic atmosphere, and hardcore gameplay difficulty. X-Fusion is not a thematic analysis of the game or its textual elements. For that, refer to my series of essays, X Marks the Spot. Instead, it covers the base game, i.e. something to play and watch, and in similar ways to the old interviews I conducted for my initial PhD research. While I have played the game myself, much of this review was gleaned by watching a variety of Metroid speedrunners suffer on YouTube and Twitch, the three primarily featured here being C. Scotty W., Oats and Goats, and Shiny Zenny, i.e. because I am not a speedrunner, but do research Metroidvania as games to speedrun. As for the game itself, it lies to players in ways that, while undeniably beautiful, cause unironic suffering. In short, X-Fusion is a bad game, and this review will explain why. Note, this review, while contained in my 2025 Metroidvania corpus, is part of my Sex Positivity book series, which continues after its June 2025 finale in small-form content, e.g. essays, and on interviews, and with other sex workers, i.e. I've worked with musers and models beyond those on my acknowledgements page, whose featured models worked with me while I produced Sex Positivity. To see everyone I've drawn before, during, and after said series, refer to my sex work page. For the visually impaired, I will also be reading this review aloud on my YouTube channel. Disclaimer regarding essay contents. All opinions are my own, i.e. as part of my research conducted alongside my book series Gothic Communism. The material within is written, speaks about public figures, and popular media for purposes of education, satire, transformation, and critique, hence falls under fair use regarding copyright, and free speech regarding defamation. Note, this review was not written based off old footage or reviews of older alpha builds of the game, or rather the full finished product. To it, the ROM hack is officially out, with Metaquarium taking his WordPress site back online to announce the debut on 8/3/2025, i.e. after having taken it offline for nearly 2 weeks. There's also a Discord server for Xfusion, one where players can talk directly with Metaquarium, give feedback on the game, and the hack is also available on MetroidConstruction.com, i.e. where players post their reviews, positive and negative. While not featured on there, mine is meant to contribute to that larger body of discourse. P.S. Regarding the untested quality of the game, I would consider its release something of a de facto open beta, i.e. extended playtesting with members of the larger gaming community. That being said, it's not actually listed as beta, the release version being 1.0, so again, I'm reviewing it as a finished product. In doing so, my review emphasizes first impressions, i.e. for versions 1.0 to 1.1, whose differences are primarily damage values and bug fixes, and while covering C. Scotty W., Oats and Goats, and Shiny Zennies first playthroughs on those versions. RE, the game is bad, yes, but specifically merits a bad review for being extremely unforgiving right out the gate, for being too hard not just for me, but for top-level players accustomed to hard games, and for whom this game lies to by appearing far easier than is actually the case. PPS. I will not be pulling any punches in this review. To be fair to Metaquarium, his hack is technically impressive, but also needs criticism the game has sorely earned if it is to be fixed in post, i.e. I wouldn't write what I'm going to write if I didn't think it possible, but need to be blunt here. This game is like a serial killer or giant spider above. I.e. waiting in the shadows to bushwhack you, and not in a fun, good one bro kind of way, but a sweet Jesus, she's dead, help me hide the body kind of way. It takes everything about Gothic, Amazon's Metroidvania, and Ludogothic BDSM, and makes it an exercise in unironic torment. It takes Fusion, one of my old-time favorite Metroidvania ever, and turns it into a brutal shell of itself. It's not Metroidvania, but Robin Williams' description of golf made frighteningly real. Right near the end, I'll put a flat piece with a little flag to give you a fucking hope. Abandon all hope, all ye who enter here. X-Fusion Review, a beautiful lie. X-Fusion has been in development for over 10 years. So after much anticipation, the game is finally out. And I hate it. Why do I hate it? Simply put, bad games make players suffer, and X-Fusion is a bad game, i.e. it lies to players to make them suffer. To quote AVGN above, I'd rather piss a cactus out of my dick than play X-Fusion again. What does that mean? Read on, dear reader, and find out. First Impression, Stuck in the Past, featuring Myst and King's Quest III. First and foremost, X-Fusion feels hopelessly stuck in the past, meaning something to paradoxically explore better than it does, in ways that need to feel more fun than the actual past and its brutalities that Metroidvania hint at, e.g. older games like Myst and King's Quest III, which we'll look at in just a moment. Except X-Fusion doesn't hint, it reenacts the past, which is to say badly and on purpose. Bad games equal player suffering regardless of intent, with X-Fusion very much a bad game by design. Also, it feels like a bad lie, but more on that point during the conclusion. As one player says on Oats and Goats stream, 2 hours gameplay, 8 to 10 hours where the fuck am I? This complaint basically sums up X-Fusion and remains one made by a variety of players, both beginner and advanced, i.e. it's too hard to an inaccessible degree. Note, again, we'll look at C. Scotty W. and Oats and Goats for the most part, but the same critiques of the hack that it's too obscure, punishing and limiting its controls also applies to other players, e.g. Shiny Zenny spending over 30 minutes on a single bomb jump puzzle that, while you can do it right off the bat, isn't meant to be done that early in the run. Furthermore, while emergent play is the magic that Metroidvania hinge on, it's ultimately a balancing act, i.e. one where intended play reminds you if you're going to have an easy time straying from the beaten path or not. This varies per game, with X-Fusion technically allowing for emergent play, unlike Fusion, but making it far harder than Super. So listening to Zenny say in one breath that he loves doing things out of sequence, only for the game to repeatedly punish him into sour bitching for trying, through puzzles designed to punish him, isn't really my idea of a good time. In fact, it's a very old-fashioned design approach, one I'll highlight moving forwards by comparing X-Fusion to Myst and similar old-school titles. Except those games' difficulty stemmed at least partially from technological limitations. By comparison, Metaquarium makes X-Fusion harder than either original palimpsest, i.e. by removing player tools and adding obscure map design loaded with deadly traps and unclear routes, whereas he's chosen to, with deliberate, a keyword that will repeatedly come up in this review, i.e. as someone with total control over the game, his mod a total conversion, consciously changing the code to make everything less effective, be that level or player. You can still bomb jump, but not well. Can still wall jump, but incur limits while jumping off the same wall panel. Can still sequence break, but suffer from the game restraining player agency inside architectural restraints, copious gating choices, etc. Playing X-Fusion and watching others play it too, there's clearly an enjoyable, nonlinear Metroidvania in there somewhere, but its curiously restrictive, adumbrable open-endedness remains a pale shadow of what it could have been, i.e. forced into the margins by Metaquarium consciously removing quality of life to force the player into a dated, hardcore experience. Informed by the past, Metaquarium expects players to suffer through the game, i.e. is redesigned with that in mind, retooled as a delivery mechanism for compelled pain, an unironic experience thereof that hinges predominantly on lies the game tells the player through numerous facades. Chief among them is the normal gameplay experience, which feels endgame, i.e. in how it forces the optional difficulty of those late-stage puzzles from Fusion to the front of the line, i.e. Zenny versus the bomb jump puzzle. While deviating from intended first-time routes remains technically possible, X-Fusion purposely skill gates alternate routes, doing so in ways that aren't always clear, and which go against the classic Metroidvania design, to encourage exploration, a good counterexample being Hollow Knight's relative ease in mid-game non-linearity after acquiring early game essentials like the Manus Claw. Said complaint of the game being too hard to an exclusionary or inaccessible degree includes Oats and Goats, a professional streamer who has serious and silly takes regarding the game's artificial challenge. On the serious side, he says on stream, Scotty said this game would make you go crazy. What? This? I mean, no, it's not that bad. I do question I really question making it so difficult when this was a very highly anticipated game for not only veteran players, but also casual players that were excited.
Scotty said this game would make you go crazy. What, this? I mean, no, it's not that bad.
This game fucking sucks.
I do question the, I really question making it so difficult when this is a very highly anticipated game for not only like veteran players, but also casual players that were excited. So I do question that. It's an interesting choice to me. So.
On the silly side, Oates jokingly says, it's a Metroidvania. Not knowing where you're supposed to go is all part of the fun. With footnote number 2 reading, fun being relative, i.e. as a certain amount of frustration is to be expected in Metroidvania. For example, my brothers and I played Super Metroid back in the 90s, trying for weeks to find the power bombs. We searched everywhere, only to discover a breakable floor after the horizontal tunnel past Red Tower. Having done so completely by accident, imagine our 8-year-old relief and chagrin, then multiply that by 100 in X-Fusion. Except if the frustration is too high and frequent, the relief tends to peter out. Such is the case with X-Fusion. In any event, this relic from Metroid 1 is barely a design issue in Super. By comparison, Metaquarium and X-Fusion has made it a core design feature. X-Fusion's design is notably regressive, deliberately falling back in that early action-adventure style the Metroid franchise eventually grew out of, e.g. invisible doors, pick-a-pipe dream gimmicks, dead ends, off-screen tunnels, one-hit kills, and far too many variations of destructible blocks acting as soft gates and indestructible switch-activated hard gates, and modular gradients of these qualities below. These are ultimately questions of game design, with Metaquarium making his game harder through said design, but also speaks to motion type, i.e. maze design shapes player movement across playthroughs, e.g. X-Fusion shapes player movement with cryptic map design, resulting in Doom-style wall humping, a blanket approach similar to bombing every single square in the original Metroid. Essentially guessing for every step Samus, therefore the player, takes. It's not fun to watch or play, save for the novelty of rote memorization. Furthermore, Doom's wall humping is largely optional, meaning reserved largely for secrets, i.e. in areas that feel optional, and so far as they reward exploration with temporary pickups, players don't actually need to finish the level, let alone the game, outside of completionist playthroughs, speedruns that place additional demands on the player. By comparison, Metroidvania of the Metroid non-linear style generally allow for variable pathways to permanent power-ups, and yet X-Fusion pointedly deviates away from this model. Yes, the permanent power-ups remain, but the primary exploration required to access them relies partially on blind, pure luck. Said luck of the initial playthrough follows up with the aforementioned rote memorization of future runs, i.e. whose deviations are themselves largely guesswork, i.e. of seemingly secret areas actually reserved for normal motion or trial-by-error repeat game overs that painfully try to break the route, all by throwing unequipped sequence breakers into kill zones. Largely fatal regardless of player loadout, such rigid maps are technically still ergodic, i.e. insofar as their movement is demonstrably non-trivial, but notably lack the directional entropy encouraged by non-linear mazes. So while players can memorize any maze, multiple nonlinear routes with variable difficulty will always feel more replayable than singular, highly difficult pathways. This is because the former allow for player invention, i.e. through the joy of discovering new emergent routes, whose impossibility in finding all routes doesn't feel difficult but fun, versus jamming said player fish in a barrel to be shot at the slightest deviations from the intended route. i.e. the Kaizo approach, except Kaizo games generally utilize platforming versus the TPS elements X-Fusion abuses, to wrap its difficulty up to extremes many players call artificial. The map difficulty feels clunky, and the combat brute force. It's cheap, torturous, bloodthirsty, and lame, but also imbalanced. Oats and Goats says the thing that they say, while sarcastically pretending to be an audience member, said viewer telling Oats how to play thus think about Metroidvania, a genre they've only played for 30-plus years. I can relate, as someone who's only made playing and studying Metroidvania her life's work, as a trans woman who initially played Metroidvania in the closet growing up, only to write about Metroidvania and speedrunning academically, combine speedrunning with BDSM, explore bigotry and speedrunning across different communities, and reassemble everything to reflect on it time and time again. As far as Metroidvania go, I'm basically a historian of historians, with speedrunners making their own history in and out of the games they play. To that, Metroidvania are both widely popular and oddly obscure, i.e. insofar as they remain largely understudied despite their widespread popularity, r.e. Jeremy Parish, highlighting the genre only to cynically discourage it. So where does X-Fusion fit in? To sum X-Fusion up, it's a niche title for a niche activity and an already niche subgenre, speedrunning Metroidvania. Specifically, ROM hacks made the test frustrate hardcore players, which speedrunners are, i.e. non-casuals. From a historical perspective, speedrunning and casual Metroidvania gameplay already go hand in hand. R.E. from my master's thesis, quote, "The game is not timed, has no in-game map system. Its world is a giant map that can be explored in-game, but also charted out of game by the player. In Super Metroid, an automap feature would be introduced. However, from a narrative standpoint, this merely illustrated what the player was already doing themselves." Unquote. Furthermore, some games exist in regular obscurity only to revive as speedruns, r.e. King's Quest III above. By making X-Fusion the way he did, Metaquarium appears to have made a game that only certain kinds of speedrunners, streamers, or diehard fans will love, a Metroidvania that's incredibly cumbersome to play that doesn't have Kaizo in the title. For once, I'll ask for more clarity in the label, not less. It might not seem like it then, but X-Fusion is oddly comparable to King's Quest III and its own cryptic shortcomings, i.e., a game with tons of intermediary steps and puzzles, some of which are extremely obtuse. It's like a riddle that you don't have the answers to, and you're not sure you're ever really going to be able to find them. Without, like, a walkthrough of something, I can't even imagine how long this game would have taken." Unquote. And in this review, I also compare X-Fusion to another puzzle game notorious for its difficulty without a guide, re. Myst, below. Footnote number 3 reads, "Newer versions of that game come with developer-provided hints and clues. My brothers and I only beating Myst on the Mac in the 90s using the strategy guide provided by a computer gaming magazine." Here was a game that emerged alongside the FPS genre in 1993, and one whose dreaded reputation largely relied on a maze filled with obscure puzzles, pretty for the time graphics, voice acting, a biggie in the early 90s, unsung technical achievements, half-completed hints, cruel twists, unreliable side characters, concentric veneers, stories and stories, books and books, and ambiguously false clues, less played for any immediate sense of accomplishment, and more a slave to the grind. Myst offered the player a marathon experience of total containment, to be held prisoner. To call Myst an acquired taste, then, would be a serious understatement, i.e. one that quickly overstays its welcome, the ensuing frustration and boredom, all but taking the action-adventure umbrella to new heights and depths. Arguably to its highest highs and lowest lows, with little room in between, Myst is ambitious to a fault, with the developer's signature inability to compromise on a singular vision becoming a defining trait in bad game design. Even so, bad game design takes many forms, and the above explanation and nostalgic forgetfulness also applies to Metaquarium's X-Fusion. For being a game that is hard without a guide, but also with one, it's arguably less impossible to solve, and more a game that feels frustrating to play despite its puzzles not being that hard. It certainly doesn't feel impossible like Myst did, but it's not really any more fun to play than that game was. Instead, it's just a weird mixture of too much of one, too little of another, and I hate it to a similar degree that I did with Myst all those years ago. Much of this hatred has to do with expectations. I walked into X-Fusion expecting something very different than what I got, but also I felt disappointed by what could have been. Metaquarium carries all the knowledge of an 80s game developer having grown into the 90s, aughts, and beyond, but one who refuses to learn from the past. Instead, he squanders said potential, doing so to recreate its worst tendencies, i.e. by dressing them up with a fresh coat of paint, offering a de-evolution that plays out in opposite fashion to those genuine innovations seen in Natsume's Shadow of the Ninja revival. The design for X-Fusion certainly takes skill, but remains woefully misapplied. To it, I said I'd review X-Fusion no matter what, and I respect its nerdy devotion to a craft Metaquarium and I approach from completely different angles. Let's get down to brass tacks, shall we? Review body, a love-it-hate-it kind of game, from speedrunners to casuals. In short, X-Fusion is a very pretty game, one that pushes the graphical limits of what these old lines of code can even do. It's also a love-it-hate-it kind of game, one whose stuck-in-a-box approach applies as much to speedrunners as it does to casual players, or scholars who study speedrunners while being casual players, re. me. Footnote number 5 reads, "Speedrunners tend to love-hate games they don't want to speedrun versus those they do. E.g. Zosu doesn't like the RNG, random number generation known to JRPGs like Final Fantasy VII, whereas other runners very much love to speedrun FF7 and similar games. Some like Arcus do a bit of either, or play a marathon of many different NES games, which tend to have similar designs, e.g. run and gun or platformers. Speedrunning is 1. A meta-activity whose emerging gameplay remains informed by intended gameplay precursors, e.g. Nintendo with the Metroid and Zelda franchises having developed some of the first games made to be speedrun, i.e. in a closed-space format with hidden rewards built in." Quote from Always More, A History of Gothic Motion from the Metroidvania Speedrunner. Beyond communities that reward speed, fast players are rewarded by Metroidvania when using the same items. Samus in Metroid will remove her armor at the end, but only if the game is beaten fast enough. Triggered, this ending produces a hidden image and a hidden system with hidden details. Its trigger, label, and ending number, a monolith striptease canonized by the game and carried forward into future meta works, i.e. critiquing present structures in past pre-capitalist virgin whore language, below. Unquote. Said movement was recursive, around which a business buoyed by Gothic themes could boom, e.g. Paul Martin's 2011 Ambivalence and Recursion in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, informing my idea of recursive motion. Lost in Acropolis purposely combining Esther Arseth's ergodic from cybertext with Bakhtin's castle narrative Gothic chronotype from the dialogic imagination when I wrote it, followed by early organized speedrunning happening in 1990, R.E. Koziel regarding Metroid 3's Nintendo World Championships. The practice grew from the late 90s and early aughts to the early 2010s to an underground circuit largely populated by white straight men. R.E. me, modularity, and class. From there, subsequent documentation happened in the late 2010s, i.e. after Metroidvania and similar speed games became popularized. Said popularity and monetization sprang not from YouTube alone, I would argue, but from Twitch that YouTube reported on, hand in hand, with Summoning Soul kicking off the speedrunner documentarian craze in 2018. Regardless, speedrunning is highly preferential, therefore arbitrary, a fact that extends to franchises. For example, C. Scotty W. loves Zero Mission and Fusion, but isn't as big a fan of Super's floaty movement, whereas Oats and Goats hates the original Metroid, but plays Super and Dread, etc. Different strokes for different folks. One man's trash is another man's treasure. In deliberately making it the way he did, Metaquarium has alienated a great number of people, i.e. while simultaneously demonstrating a great deal of promise and community goodwill with post-release patches. To reiterate, this is not me hating on Metaquarium as a creator, and if you like the game, more power to you. I just happen to hate it, but respect the craft that went into it. So I want to express why and how as succinctly and accurately as I can. It might not sound like it, but I want to be as fair and measured in my criticism as I can. Whatever the prefaces at work, time is precious both to speedrunners and casual players alike, i.e. no one likes having their time wasted, suffering a feeling that players can equate to wasting time felt, among other things, total frustration regardless of intent. In Metroidvania, time is motion through space, i.e. the puzzle to solve being the game world itself, which generally is some kind of maze or labyrinth. The core problem with Xfusion is the ways to go are not intuitive, and sequence breaks can lead to difficult areas that stay difficult long after they really shouldn't, e.g. the arc area staying freezing cold until you turn on the auxiliary power, something that happened with C. Scotty W's blind run until the game was nearly over. They can also, in the spirit of Environment Station Alpha above, actually break various in-game sequences, i.e. if you perform certain events or access certain areas out of order, on purpose or not, then these and or other events and areas achieved through early access can break when accessed later, with too late being unintuitive in its own right. Generally, this doesn't soft-lock them, but it still feels clunkier than a game that spent over 10 years in the oven really should. So, 10 points from Gryffindor. In short, Xfusion technically allows for sequence breaking quite a bit actually, but in practice somewhat falls apart. This isn't just bad game design, but bad Metroidvania design. Ari from Mazes and Labyrinths. Quote, Metroidvania are a location-based video game genre that combines 2D, 2.5D, or 3D platforming, e.g. Dark Souls, and ranged melee combat, usually in the third person, inside a giant closed space. This space communicates Gothic themes of various kinds and encourages exploration depending on how linear the space is, includes progressive skill and item collection, mandatory boss keys, backtracking, and variable gating mechanics, bosses, items, doors, and requires movement power-ups in some shape or form, though these can be supplied through RPG elements as an optional alternative. Exploration pertains to the deliberate navigation of space beyond that of obvious linear routes, to search for objectives, or secrets off the beaten path. Unquote. Sequence breaking is spatially fundamental to the Metroidvania experience, one that Xfusion gets wrong as much by accident as not. As such, Clint Hawking's adage, seek power and you will progress, becomes something Xfusion denies players in highly annoying ways, not the palliative numinous is coined by me, but a complete and utter pain in the ass that Metaquarium arguably borrowed from older bad games mid-evolution, re. Myst. And even if this wasn't deliberate, the de-evolution still feels convergent, intent doesn't matter, outcomes do, and the primary outcome to X-Fusion is endless frustration begot from the game repeatedly deceiving the player. That being said, some deception is to be expected, i.e. it comes from changes happening over time. In turn, Metroidvania is a subgenre endlessly cloning itself, each time resulting in new errors, mutations. Ari, this castle is a creature of chaos, and while the X-Fusion README file explains that the game isn't intended for casuals, it's also a bit of a head-scratcher as to why that should even be, i.e. while including difficulty modes, why set the game off so that you gatekeep 90% of players and getting partway through your game. It'd be like having 6 difficulties for Doom, only to have Don't Hurt Me play like Nightmare, and only getting harder from there. As a result, a common complaint I've heard about X-Fusion was and is, this game isn't fun. It plays like a bad game on purpose, so much so that its in-game dialogue seems to know it and chuckle, or dip into True Camp, below. From Susan Sontag's notes on Camp, True Camp is seriousness that fails. I feel like I'm watching Hitchcock torture the actress, except she's an Amazon torturing us through the player soon to be humiliated by the events that unfold. Samus is a total dork, one who sounds like she belongs on r/I am very badass. I will show that thing who is the real nightmare here. So despite all his technical skill in coding X-Fusion, Metaquarium kind of misses the point of games, to have fun. Which torturing players could be, I suppose, albeit from a sadistic developer's point of view. And while some masochistic players can still have fun, despite the game's high difficulty floor and sadistic approach, the fact remains that floor is deceptively high, i.e. X-Fusion appears like a normal Metroid game, but whose torturous design makes movement through the base game difficult in ways that don't translate visually well. For example, this missile room accessed by Oats and Goats appears normal, but requires a deliberately tricky puzzle to solve, or one that doesn't visually communicate its difficulty to the player. Instead, it's abstruse, an ostensibly empty room, one bearing no obvious indication of it being a puzzle to begin with Oates' "It's just that easy, folks," teasing the audience a bit, i.e. owing to the fact that Oates isn't a novice. Victory here occurs through dumb luck, or pre-preparedness, which isn't a good combination for fresh players. X-Fusion sticks to the past, refusing to evolve and struggling to get off the ground as a result. There's certainly cool moments scattered throughout, no pun intended, but sadly they're largely held back, i.e. by how much the game, therefore of the game, concerns things you can't directly see. The entire game is like this, versus moving relatively quickly from point A to point B, with a healthy dose of sequence breaks, boss keys, backtracking, and light puzzle work mixing things up. Every room in X-Fusion is an utter slog, filled with death traps that look harmless. Enemies kill you in one hit, scripted events have a do-or-die feel to them, on par with Don Bluth's Dragon Slayers series, and the aforementioned abstruse qualities make the whole experience as frustrating for the audience as it does the players involved. E.g., the Gravity SAX sequence, something that, while Oats and Goats plays it for laughs, below, still comments on him having prior knowledge, and also being a pro used to playing Kaizo-style runs, i.e. where knowledge is both scarce and learn as you go. It's confusing to play in Latch, i.e. because it should be easier than it appears, falling short on every conceivable level because its visuals and gameplay combine to frustrate the player and the audience. RE, as a bad game, one favoring artificial difficulty spikes, that feel deliberately unfair and unfun to experience, on either side of the controller and or screen, regardless of where it looks like a normal game and plays like a Kaizo hack. The out-of-joint unheimlich effect is one of constant confusion, frustration, and disempowerment, i.e. it goes beyond what is expected of the Metroidvania genre, but also survival horror. At least with the latter genre, a given game is built around a weak player, character, that walks you, the avatar, through on the tightrope. By comparison, X-Fusion lacks a tightrope, thereby forcing the player to faceplant trial by error until the novelty wears off, which it very quickly does. Again, X-Fusion is part Metroid, part Myst, an oil-to-water fusion of different schools of thought, one doomed to disappoint all but the most pig-headed of players, i.e. those stubbornly determined to actually enjoy the intentionally bad combo, even when it hurts to play, so-called gaming masochism. And while plenty of visual wizardry and novel gaming mechanics embellish X-Fusion, much of it is spoiled by how you can't intuitively engage with Let's enjoy what you're looking at. Ari, as a player or audience member, watching seasoned pros get routinely stuck in or frustrated at Xfusion is about as fun as watching paint dry. And that's really too bad, considering the game's underlying desire to fix fusion by making it less linear and more engaging through terrifying survival horror elements. The whole thing could have blossomed. Indeed, I wanted to enjoy what I was looking at. Instead, it rots on the vine. More's the pity. Other complaints I have about Xfusion include various omissions of classic Metroidvania staples, e.g. the minimap, apparently for technical limitations, and the color-coded doors of yore. While Zero minimap is just Metroid 1 reborn, shooting doors of different colors with the same weapons to open them just feels wrong. Footnote number 7. With color-coded doors being a quick, easy way to emblematize gates, i.e. ones that present as relatively conspicuous, thus easy to remember, while also being fairly limited in number, with blocks that can be far more numerous, as well as requiring players to shoot them every time they went through, small, harder to hit mini doors that can easily crowd and camouflage an obstacle course, overstuffing it, i.e. with cryptic minutiae the player must memorize but can't directly see. So later when I say the game is over-designed, this is largely what I mean. Likewise, being forced by the game into the menu mid-flight to rely on reserve tanks, constantly for both health and ammo, or to check your map, already because you're aggressively stumped by too many gates and dead ends, makes the game feel less like Metroid and more like Resident Evil 4, minus the good combat. Samus feels oddly hobbled, the constant menuing making players feel disoriented while breaking the admittedly solid boss action up with monotonous mechanics. Perhaps I wouldn't care if the game didn't demand players look at the map every 2 seconds, already because the map design is confusing as shit, but demand you it does. This includes Metaquarium deliberately hard-gating door locks, replacing the original map stations from Fusion above. Which only makes it easier to run into areas that have only one set unicursorial path, e.g. Screw Attack, with C. Scotty W. saying to himself, "If it's another Screw Attack block, I'm gonna scream." Footnote 7a. With Scotty, despite being a world record zero mission and Fusion speedrunner I've interviewed before, saying roughly 8.5 hours in, I don't know if, for this section here, I'm just soft-locked for no reason. Like, there's no indication and it's so obtuse. Yeah, I've got complaints here. I've got a lot of complaints.
I don't know if this section here I'm just soft-locked for no reason. Like, there's no indication, and it's so obtuse that you can't, like... Woo! Yeah, I've got complaints here. I got a lot of complaints.
These really aren't the words you want to hear from players deep into a game. Yes, fatigue can be a part of it, but the fatigue a bad game causes only leads to players hating something after a certain point, versus the satisfaction of having made it thus far and wanting to continue. Xfusion only has you feeling like you're fumbling around in the dark, randomly bumping into shit the developers put there precisely so you can, and will, bump into it. It's humiliating, and furthermore, not any fun to watch after a certain point. I feel as bad for the people playing and watching as I do performing either of these things myself. Maybe Scotty had some slack to cut the game early on, but by the end said slack was well and truly spent. Furthermore, the anger these players exhibit is not faked, nor is it enjoyable for me. I'm just not sadistic enough to force someone to play a Kaizo game in disguise, and watching Scotty suffer made me feel more and more like Roddy McDowell from A Clockwork Orange. Torture disguised as entertainment made cryptonomy, or to show and hide at once. Said disguise reminds me sadly of the AVGN's original Karate Kid review back in 2006. Not just this game is ass, but also this longer quote. So what is it about this game that's drawn so many unfortunate kids to turn into bitter adults? I mean, anybody who's beaten this incredibly hard piece of shit will not have any sense of satisfaction, but rather regrets because it's a complete waste of fucking time. I mean, it's like coming out of a brutal fight, being the winner, but achieving nothing for all your trouble but some bloody bruises and broken bones. It's just not worth it. I hate this game, but why am I playing it? Well, that's the question everyone has asked themselves, and they all have the same reason. Because you're angry and you want to win. You want to beat the Nintendo. but the cold fact is, no one cares but you." Unquote. I'm not even trying to compare X-Fusion to the Karate Kid here, but it feels incredibly apt, and that's very bad from a game design standpoint. Also, while I don't obviously agree with everything James Rolfe has said and done reviewing games, though he was at his best in the early days of YouTube, there's a point to be had concerning X-Fusion. It's not about being good at the game alone, but having the self-defeating stubbornness to see it through because the game's design sucks. Regardless of any injury exacted upon one's health, sanity, and or ego, X-Fusion is simply over-designed. The phrase trial by fire leaps to mind, something no readme or misguided sense of nostalgia can really prepare you for. Footnote number 8. Longing for the past is all fine and good. Torturing oneself to make the experience as unpleasant as possible, like the past where shitty games suck ass that Rolfe critiques and Kyle Justin famously sings about, can only play out like a bad joke, i.e. Marx's first in tragedy, then in farce refrain. Metaquarium feels like a glutton for punishment, one determined to glut himself on player suffering, a bad DM in D&D parlance. So get your jollies by playing X-Fusion if you like, /dare, but remember who you're feeding as you do. Playing X-Fusion, I felt intensely confused. Where's ledge grab and repeatable wall jump? Why is fire rate nerfed? The hack notably combines Fusion and Super into a single game. It feels even more myopic and linear than Fusion did, i.e., while making Super's trademark progression freedom of play all but impossible. It's completely infuriating. And at first I thought it was just me, but then I saw far more skilled players getting noticeably pissed at X-Fusion too. It was real anger coming from seasoned vets. Gameplay and game criticism go hand in hand. Hate the player, not the game, an adage that reverses easily enough. This felt deliberate, with all player types getting reliably tilted by Metaquarium seemingly by design. What could irk so many different players, you ask? Personally, I think it's how X-Fusion's every flaw compounds in the worst ways possible, i.e. by throwing the player headfirst into, if not the most difficult, and certainly the most painful experience possible, i.e. high damage combined with deliberately confusing puzzles and progression. Nothing synergizes, and it plays like needle in a stack of needles. It's certainly the most handsome 2D Metroid I've ever played, but also the most frustrating and unintuitive. While Metroidvania can certainly be hard to differing degrees, and generally make easier speed games harder than they would be otherwise, X-Fusion is simply hard, right out the gate. Professional runners should not be getting schooled this badly. If they are, then what hope do I have? Again, this doesn't just affect me, nor does it affect Shiny Zenny, a player known for being vocal when playing games. Not even Oates, someone a bit more even-keeled, if self-depreciating, gets out of it unscathed. Fuck you. That is so bullshit, he shouts at the screen. They get stuck in the door and they don't have a hurt box. They can just sit in the door and, "Oh, I'm good."
Shot. Wait, do we have to pay the believers? Or what? Fuck you! That is so bullshit. Because it gets stuck in the door and they don't have a hurt box in the door. They can sit in the door. Oh, if I lose the image, I'm good.
At some point, whatever performance they make for show gradually gives way to genuine impatience, the ensuing frustrations releasing after constant smaller harassment, microaggressions, i.e. from the game, until the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back rears its ugly head. In short, even with someone accustomed to bullshit like Oates, he still lost his shit at various points, e.g. towards the end. This is pissing me off. How do I get out of this hellhole?
Okay. This is pissing me off. How do I get out of this hellhole?
In ways he didn't with Kaizo's Super Metroid or Super Metroid Impossible, whose makers advertised them as such and who played appeared as such. The expectation up front is frustration, which lets players prepare for the pain before signing the ludic contract. Players should spoil the game, not the other way around. See footnote. Footnote number 9. A ludic contract being something the player agrees to in advance based on pre-existing information. There are often holy considerations too, the Protestant ethic, or as Simon Pratt writes, quote, whatever tactics and stratagems that players may develop, the unspoken agreement is that none of their moves should threaten the spirit of the game, and the spirit of the game is nothing more than the set of mutual expectations and understandings between the players, and the highest and most basic of which is that the game is worth playing at all, unquote. Yet, while such dogmatic expectation historically leads to a canonical sense of damnation, that one is damned to play the game because it was given to them, players can ultimately subvert these to play as actually being rather flexible. From my series glossary, quote, an agreement between the player and the game to be played, or as Chris Prass writes in praise of Spoilsports, the more traditional definition of the ludic contract is an agreement on the part of players that they will forego some of their agency in order to experience an activity that they enjoy. Yet inventive players like Speedrunners, which Pratt calls Spoilsports, converge upon intended gameplay with unintended emergent forms. In other words, the ludic contract is less a formal, rigid contract and more a negotiated compromise occurring between the two, where players have some sense of agency in deciding how they want to play the game, even while adhering to its rules and, in effect, being mastered by it. See Seth Giddings and Helen Kennedy's Little Jesuses and Fuck Off Robots. Unquote. Even so, such forces clearly buckle, whenever games like Et's Fusion test the devotion and patience of players mid-interpretation, a fan game effectively taking corporate canon and breaking it on purpose, but also the brains of players. Players should spoil the game, not the other way around. X-Fusion, by comparison, plays like an absolute dick, hiding its knife before plunging it into you and repeatedly twisting it. It's stressful because it eliminates, or at least severely undercuts, player consent and agency. And before you mention the README, Metaquarium tells people to read. READMEs don't really prepare you for what's to come. Quite the opposite, in fact. Furthermore, even if they did, a game that requires you to read the instruction manual to have a good time is, in my humble opinion, a poorly designed game, in which I trade all the misery content that results for a game that I can actually watch or play to my heart's content. Again, bad game equals game that makes player and audience suffer alike. X-Fusion isn't just a bad game, but a Faustian one too. And if that sucks to hear, I agree. Then again, some of these things can be fixed with future patches. Easy mode, plus repeatable wall jump and ledge grab, for example. All the same, and to reiterate, the technical skill required to make something like this, while completely astounding as something man-made, falls entirely flat from a delivery standpoint. It took you 10 years to make this? It's a fair question, and one I ask if only because the sole point of all that hard work seems to be unapologetic torture. Yeah, Metaquarium works in assembly code, essentially what task coders do. X-Fusion magically rewriting several titles before combining them, thus introducing a variety of content into the games involved. But dude, it flat out plays like shit. It's not hard, it's punitive. I'm not saying this purely as someone who wrote her PhD on Metroidvania, but an ordinary trans girl lodging an honest complaint. Someone who grew up with these games and having played a variety of hacks in her 30s too. I played Super on the SNES back in 1994 and Fusion on the GBA back in 2002. I grew up watching Alien and Aliens on VHS, loving Amazons but also all manner of monstrous feminine. Ergo, I enjoy games as a culture that goes far beyond the TV or computer screen and into real life as half real, with conventions above. Speaking to a space between fiction and non-fiction as sharing the rules, me vis-a-vis Jesper Jules half real, but also a spectrum of fan enterprises doing just that, e.g. video game remixes. remixing video game music happening all the way back in 2000 with the mini-bosses and Any Eskimos, but also Grant Henry's Metroid metal from the early 2000s onwards. So while I understand that you can't please everyone, Xfusion feels like Metaquarium is trying to please the most niche of niche players imaginable, speedrunners who play bad games on purpose. And if the ads, not the fucking readme, were more clear about that, I wouldn't have cared. But in lying to players like he does, a lie of omission is still a lie. Or by making players feel lied to, i.e. by torturing them following an astoundingly bad or misleading advertising campaign, re dust off your SNES.
To isolation lockdown.
And play a game far more abstruse than Super Metroid ever was, Metaquarium has broken the unwritten rule of ludic contracts, lying to players up front and intending to drive them nuts. Conclusion: a bad lie. To conclude, Metaquarium seems bent on fucking the player over, effectively lying to ease them into the empty promise of something the game isn't, re fun. Instead, Xfusion plays less like Metroid and more like the witch's house, i.e. every room is a death trap, making the sheer number of energy tanks, power-ups, and weapons, missiles, beams, and bombs, oddly deceptive, re false power, except the witch's house lacks the same expectations. Furthermore, it subverts them to deliver a satisfying ending to what is, more or less, a ghost story meant to fool the player, meaning in ways that feel satisfying when all said and done. In short, it's the point, the format made for it. Re from our ludic masters, quote, the real horror is retrospective, when the hero was already dead, trapped inside a blind, disintegrating body while taking Viola to warn the player. The player reacts towards the hostile home like Viola's father did towards his transformed daughter, with fear and aggression. 2. Every action made to preserve Viola was actually keeping the witch, the hero's destroyer, alive. 3. The hero ultimately fails and the villain wins. The player is hoodwinked into self-destruction. Ignominious death? Check. Unquote. Yes, the witch's house is very hard, but it's also coming from the action-adventure genre as not hiding that aspect about itself. For all the deception the narrative pulls, what you see is what you get. The player wants to be fooled, if only to say touché. By comparison, Xfusion lies to the player in how it looks and plays, doing to them what most arguably don't want. It's a trap and a lie, one told to the player to make them forget the kind of game they're actually playing, not a fresh new Metroidvania, but a wholly ambivalent love letter to the annoying past resurrected, trapping the player in its box. I feel lied to by Metaquarium, which isn't skill. It's someone manipulating their audience for years, and all to deliver a subpar product, or a bad game whose lie ostensibly tortures players, and for no good reason, pleasing the hacker at the player's expense. And while that is something to be expected within reason, this degree of discomfort goes a bridge too far. You can't solve that with spiffy cutscenes, i.e. gameplay equals whatever lies beyond the cinematic elements, re the black veil, below. And this is where Xfusion's biggest deception occurs, the promise of something beyond the veil in question as worth experiencing. Instead, I just feel lied to, so wowed by Metaquarium's big battle set pieces that I never stopped to ask why he avoided gameplay demos. It's an information blackout. Partly I can blame the secrecy of the project and lack of playtesting on that front, but therein lies the rub. Having been in development for over 10 years, Xfusion suffers from a lack of feedback, a bit like Dr. Frankenstein, to be fair. In other words, the flow of information goes both ways. And if a hard-as-nails game catering to a small number of hardcore players was Metaquarium's starting aim, then I get it. Super Metroid and Fusion are way too easy, out of the box. But also, there's a big difference between difficulty for its own sake and posing a challenge in ways that feel rewarding, despite the adversity offered up, mendacious or not. Xfusion is just adversity to piss players off. Yes, it solves the puzzle, making Samus's power-ups ineffective endgame, but it only does this by turning the bosses into pretty distractions from basic game flaws. Less is more, I think, but Metaquarium, just as I predicted, goes a tad overboard. Indeed, he far exceeded my predictions, i.e. with X marks the spot, largely critiquing the game for its thematic content, my work failing to anticipate just how badly designed it feels when played. By making the game so specialized, and by relying on a lopsided development process, Xfusion feels very much like a missed opportunity. It's a technical marvel on its own, but a colossal wreck from a design standpoint. Instead of enjoying myself, I felt sucked into a trap, one I wanted to escape by not playing it. versus immersing myself among the terrible wreckage. Bad games equal games someone doesn't want to play, usually entire groups of people who normally do want to play what they hope is a good game. An X-Fusion is a bad game. Metroidvania or not, the Gothic past should be something to adore and worship inside, not compel people to actually run away from, screaming as they do. And yes, calculated risk requires balance, but per Little Gothic BDSM denotes play and power to invoke a balancing act. Said act should respect consent to regain control, and all as the game invokes feelings of danger and harm, i.e. without frustrating or harming anyone, including by lying to them. To that, lies are fine if they don't cause harm. And the Gothic is built on lies that Metroidvania perpetuate, i.e. in ways that lessen harm through themselves, given the proper balance is struck, e.g. the Annie-Eskimos Norfair Tenement Blues, going for the very vibes that X-Fusion tries to capture, but doesn't stick the landing. By comparison, the song highlights these paradoxical feelings as captured, i.e. without subjecting oneself to unironic torment, chasing the numinous minus the harm given a chant a violent ritual speaks to. Infestations can be dealt with, I think to myself, as I grit my teeth, determined to take back this land where the lava grows and warms the worthy. 1 and 2 and through, I chant to myself as my missiles check in and I'm already reloading. And now I've taken hundreds of them, but I hear the slithering of thousands more. The feeling of zero control is there, but actual control is maintained. In short, it's the perfect DOM, i.e. the Metroidvania during Little Gothic BDSM should ideally represent. Sadly, X-Fusion is like a bad BDSM partner. Zero instruction while melting your face off, Metaquarium returning the player to a flawed childhood, the nightmare home. I.e. one that, while numinous, isn't palliative. I'll play X-Fusion till the cows come home. X-Fusion is a haunted house. I refuse to go inside more than I already have. It reminds me of things I want to forget, re Myst, which I played back in the mid-90s. Not the joy of calculated risk, but a lack of control followed by genuine confusion, mid-lie. Bad games make players unironically suffer. To it, X-Fusion feels more than a little like that uncanny scene from The Invitation, where the hero and his wife are running away from the table, chased by the killer inside a house that no longer resembles the hero's memory of it. And yes, not everyone plays these games to overcome trauma, though I would argue that most actually do. Fair enough. That's my problem, I guess. But the fact remains, people from all over have the same hostile response to X-Fusion that I did. Keeping the invitation in mind, I wanted to ask the hero's question to Metaquarium. Why is everyone being so fucking polite? Not everyone is, to be sure, but any desire to be polite by me has since been swept aside by how mean-spirited this game feels. Are you a sadist? I want to ask Metaquarium, because this game feels like nails on a chalkboard to me. To it, I've never hated a Metroid game before, but then X-Fusion happened, torturing scores of players after a 10-plus years waiting period, and all in the middle of a global crisis, as one more brief distraction from the agony of multiple genocides. Would have been nice, so while I certainly don't want to distract myself permanently from what's happening in Palestine, I also felt like I needed a small break, i.e. from the abject suffering taking place there and elsewhere, e.g. all the Nazis in the White House saying my ass is illegal, and you pulled this bullshit? Sorry, but I gotta yuck that yum. Say merde. I want a hero. Here's to hoping that future patches make X-Fusion more fun to play or watch than it currently is. So yeah, that's my review. If you like the review itself, you can support my work on Ko-fi and Patreon, but also on YouTube. If you want to like, share, and subscribe, that always helps. Also, you can leave a comment. What did you think about X-Fusion? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Is there something else you think I should have mentioned and that I left out? Let me know. Maybe I'll do a follow-up. Also, if you want a further in-depth reading of the thematic content of the game, you can go to X Marks the Spot, which is a thematic prelude to my review of the game. It is something that I use to basically go over a lot of the thematic elements, including Amazons, live burial, the archaic mother, and various other things that are just commonplace in Metroidvania, but especially the Metroid series in particular. Gorgons, Amazons, Samus, Mother Brain, Ellen Ripley, the Alien Queen, so on and so forth. So yeah, there's that. If this is something that's whetting your appetite, but you have, a hankering for something a little bit more in-depth from a praxial standpoint, from a thematic standpoint, you can read that. But otherwise, thank you for stopping by and attending this episode of my Metroidvania YouTube series. Until next time, stay safe out there and take care.